The first sound wasn't his voice. It was the dull thud of a thick stack of files slamming against the polished wooden table. The echo cracked through the sealed room like a gavel in court, sharp enough to make the white porcelain coffee cup tremble and slide across its saucer. The fluorescent lights above buzzed on, that flat, relentless hum like a bee trapped inside a glass jar. The boardroom of Metatronics thickened in an instant, as if the oxygen had been sucked out, leaving only the faint sterile scent drifting up from the hospital floor below. Then the voice came. Cold, smooth, every word released like it had been rehearsed a dozen times in front of a mirror, effective immediately. Dr. Lila Monroe, you are terminated from your position as Chief Architect of Biomedical Engineering. The room froze. Not a single breath dared break rhythm. The assistant's pen halted mid-air. Even the shuffle of suit fabric fell silent. Board members glanced sideways for only a split second before lowering their eyes, as if a glance in my direction could count as complicity. No one met my gaze, though only months ago they toasted with me after a heart-saving project had shocked the medical press with its success. I looked straight at Victor Halden, the new CEO hailed as the next savior of Metatronics. He sat at the head of the table, navy suit pressed crisp, red tie pulled so tight it seemed to choke him. The way he leaned back into that glossy chair reminded me of the insurance salesman at small-town fairs, the kind who believed they were about to change your life, but only repeated the same tired slogans. He walked into power, selling words like streamline and optimize, looped endlessly like an old cassette tape hissing in the background. That was his leadership, confident, polished, completely hollow. My heart pounded, blood rushing hot in my ears. 15 years of memory collided at once. Nights I passed out on my keyboard. Dinners were missed because the lab held me hostage. The night my father died, I was still stuck in research. At my sister's wedding, I saw only through blurry photos because a deadline chained me to my desk. All of it compressed into the 4 clipped words he just delivered. A cut, clean and bloodless, but piercing bone deep. I knew what he wanted. He imagined me erupting, slamming the table, screaming headlines that tabloids would salivate over. A woman out of control, an explosion to decorate his little theater of power. He wanted the show. But I refused to perform. I closed the folder in front of me, stacked it neatly, slowly, as if this were any other meeting ending on schedule. I rose, spine taller than it had ever felt. Then I clapped, just once. A sharp, deliberate crack that shattered the silence gripping the room. Thank you. 2 words, calm, precise, without a tremor, spoken like thanking a waiter for a refill of coffee. A few eyes widened. Wooden chairs creaked as bodies jerked back, faces twisted like I had just swallowed a shard of ice. Victor stayed planted, forcing his grin under the blinding ceiling lights. But I saw it. The twitch at the corner of his mouth, the narrowing of his eyes, just for a flicker. A flicker was enough. My thank you shook him more than any rage ever could. Inside, I didn't feel small. I felt weightless. A chain had just fallen to the floor, because buried deep in those documents, in the fine print no one cared to read, I had planted something long ago, a seed waiting for this very moment. But that was a story for another day. For now, I let the 2 words echo through the boardroom, louder than any scream. I turned and walked out. My heels rang sharply against the glass hallway. The reflection staring back at me was of a woman fired from her job. But my stride carried a strange release. This wasn't a setback, it was an opportunity. The sentence pulsed in my mind like a prophecy. And now I ask you, the one listening to this, have you ever been dismissed in plain sight, in a room where eyes looked away, where your work was erased with a single nod of indifference? If you have, leave a comment. Tell me the city you're hearing this from. Boston, Chicago, Houston, or a small town tucked somewhere in the heartland. I want to see a map of hearts stretching across this country. I read every word, and remember this. Sometimes you don't need to shout. You don't need to slam your fists. You don't need to beg. A single clap. A quiet thank you. That alone can make them shake more than any scream. I never thought I would drift away from the hospital hallways, where the steady beep of heart monitors marked every passing minute. But my path began there. I was a resident, sitting for hours at the bedsides of patients, waiting for the long, flat tone that signaled life had slipped away. One winter night on call, I watched a young patient collapse right on the gurney because the monitor lagged by just a few seconds. Just seconds, but enough to decide his fate. The image of his eyes, wide open, then fading, haunted me for years. That night, I knew. We didn't just need more doctors. We needed smarter tools to sound the alarm in time. So I veered off, leaving medicine for biomedical technology, carrying that memory like a shadow. The research path was anything but glamorous. It began with endless nights in a basement lab, fluorescent lights spilling across cold steel tables. I lived on watered-down coffee and salty cup noodles. Night after night, I stared at lines of code, recording data streams that read like scripture. One time, the clock on the wall struck 4 a.m. before I realized my body had gone numb. Instead of lying down, I pulled the old white headband my mother gave me across my forehead and kept typing. It was her simple gift before my residency graduation, with one reminder: never forget, this profession exists to save lives, not to chase recognition. That headband became my talisman. It soaked up sweat and fatigue, but always reminded me of why I started. The price of those years was steep. My father died suddenly on a spring morning while I was deep into a 48-hour shift. My phone rang over and over, but I was buried in debugging code for a new heart sensor. By the time I called back, all I heard was my mother's broken voice. He's gone. I missed his last breath, and the guilt still weighs on me today. After the funeral, my mother sent me a photo of my father smiling, with a small note tucked inside. "You cannot save the whole world. Don't carry it all alone." I folded that note and placed it beside the white headband. Every time I wore it, I remembered there was an old woman back home who still needed her daughter, not a machine trapped in a lab. I missed my sister's wedding too. That day, the whole family gathered, their smiles frozen in photos I only saw later in an email. I was in Boston, locked in debate with engineers about signal filters. My sister never blamed me, but in the photo her eyes tilt slightly away from the camera, as if searching for someone who should have been there. My family never spoke of it. Their silence carried more weight than reproach. Still, I wasn't alone. I had a team once. Dylan, the sharp-tongued joker who could make us laugh in the middle of a brutal debug. "If this system blows up, at least it will blow up in our hands," he quipped, and we all laughed before diving back into the code. Priya, fierce and tireless, who brought coffee at 3 a.m, her eyes steady as if to say, "We'll make it." And Ethan Cole, the protege I trusted most. We shared cold pizza during trial runs. I believed he was the one who understood the system end to end, the one who would hold the line beside me when the storm came. I was wrong. At first, our work lived only in obscure conferences, papers barely skimmed. But then the results began to shine. The new sensors predicted cardiac episodes at least 2 minutes earlier than existing devices. 2 minutes. In emergency medicine, that meant life itself. Doctors took notice. Patients survived. Journals called. And that was when the hands of others reached for the credit. One morning, I woke up to see the cover of a top medical journal. Ethan, hands tucked into his white coat, smiling confidently beneath the headline. The young star behind the breakthrough in biomedical sensing. I looked closer and saw myself in the photo too, but not by name. Just a cold caption. Assistant, unnamed. I read it over and over, my chest turning to ice. Ethan didn't meet my eyes when the article came out. "PR needs a fresh face," he mumbled. One neat sentence, wiping away a decade of my life spent in the lab. I didn't argue, I just touched the white headband, reminding myself I worked for patients, not for magazine covers. But I remembered that moment. Then came Victor Halden. No medical training, no grasp of circuitry, but he knew one thing: how to make investors clap. He loved words like synergy and optimization, repeating them so often he sounded programmed. Under his hand, the project was rebranded, wrapped in glossy packaging, and every sacrifice was reduced to bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. I became a name too hard to pronounce, too easy to ignore. I didn't scream when I saw my name shoved to the end of the author list. I didn't protest when Victor introduced Ethan as the technology's backbone. I just documented everything, every contract, every buried footnote. I kept it in my private file, and I kept wearing the white headband. No longer pristine, now stained with ink and sweat. But it was my witness. It whispered the same truth. This work was born to save lives, not to make men rich. From the outside, I looked like a failure, a doctor pushed aside from the very project I created. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. They had cut my contribution into an anonymous caption, but I still held a piece of the key no one had noticed. When the time came, those tiny lines of text would echo louder than any CEO's speech. 2 years ago, I saw the ship start to tilt. That was the day Metatronics announced a 40% budget cut for the research division. The notice landed cold and sharp, like a knife straight to the gut. Short, emotionless, accompanied by a blood-red chart swallowing nearly the whole slide. In the lab, sighs rippled through the air. Dylan dropped his pen and muttered a dry joke. At least now we'll finally get some sleep. Priya tried to lift us up, but disappointment flashed in her eyes. Ethan bit his lip, glancing at me, as if to ask, "Now what?" The team thought the project was finished. Budget cuts meant no more equipment, no more overtime, no chance of clearing FDA approval. Years of work poured into our cardiac sensor system looked ready to be dumped in the trash, replaced by some flashy restructuring campaign that rang hollow like an empty tin can. That night, I stayed alone in the lab. The only light came from my computer screen, casting a pale glow across the white headband on my forehead. Outside the window, Boston rain drummed on the roof, each drop like an artificial heartbeat. I opened contract after contract, flipping every clause, every signature, every Metatronic seal stared back at me as evidence of a crime still in progress. They were about to kill what we built, turn blood and sweat into a product strangled for short-term profit. That night, I didn't debug code. I wrote a contract. Line by line, I typed slowly, coldly, like carving a spell into stone. Clause 7.3.2. The words were dry but sharp. In the event that the project is canceled or direct oversight is terminated, full ownership of the invention and operational rights automatically revert to the chief architect. In other words, if they threw me off the ship, I would take the wheel with me. I didn't smile when I finished. I simply removed the headband, wiped the sweat from its edge, and whispered, "If someone burns this bridge, it will stay ashes forever." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise to myself that the technology would never become a toy for profit, only to be killed off when the shine faded. The next day, I presented the revised contract at the meeting. The board barely glanced at it. Victor wasn't CEO yet. His predecessors only wanted one thing: to get through the FDA review fast enough to tell investors a product was coming. They signed, flipped pages, and nodded like I had added routine paperwork. No one asked why I had typed every semicolon with such precision. No one realized they had just handed me a blade. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why add all this? They'll never read it." I answered calmly. "Exactly. That's the point." He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. After the meeting, I walked into the hallway with the new contract tucked neatly in my folder. Through the glass, I saw Boston's clock tower glowing in the rain. In that moment, I felt both guilt and relief. Guilt because I no longer trusted Metatronics as a home, relief because I had planted a seed to protect the truth. I didn't stop there. A week later, I formed a small LLC, barely visible, registered to a cramped co-working office on Tremont Street. On paper, that company had the right to inherit all intellectual property if Clause 7.3.2 was triggered. An empty shell, yes, but a legal shell. I knew their favorite game was rules, so I played the rules too. Just not the way they expected. The night I filed the LLC, I watched the words application, submitted successfully, flash across the screen. I didn't smile. I simply took a long breath and placed the white headband beside my keyboard. I knew one day those dry words would roar louder than any speech delivered in a boardroom. Dylan once asked me, "Do you really think they'll fire you?" And I looked at him and answered softly, "They don't see it yet. But they will because people like me don't bow." Priya shook her head. "You're reckless. but I believe in you." She didn't press further. We both understood. Sometimes recklessness is the last armor left. Ethan was different. He smirked. "If one day you end up owning this project, I hope you won't forget who stood with you." I nodded, offering no promises because loyalty is thinner than people want to believe. Over the next 2 years, the project survived. But I began to see the cracks. Metatronics treated the work more and more like a trading chip. Victor, now elevated to CEO, only cared about slides and slogans. He loved calling the technology a quantum leap, though he had no idea how it actually ran. I sat at the far end of the table, listening to him drone on, remembering every number, every line of code we had lost sleep to write. I found it laughable. They thought they were in control. They didn't know that buried in those papers they signed in haste, I had hidden a seed, a spark, a velvet-wrapped blade, and I waited. Waited for the day they believed they had erased me from the picture, when Clause 7.3.2 would speak for itself. I never pretended to be a hero. I only knew this. Left in their hands, the technology would be drained dry and discarded like a husk. I hadn't created it for Metatronics to stamp with a shiny logo. I created it to save patients like the one who collapsed on the gurney years ago. That was why I wrote the contract, why I built the shell company, and why I kept the white headband close. They might see me as a woman obsessed, but let's be honest. A hospital needs obsession more than it needs slogans. I slipped the folder into my desk drawer and locked it. The key sat in my white coat pocket, right over my heart. I walked into the dark hallway and flicked on the fluorescent lights. The buzzing filled the air again, grating yet familiar. One day, I thought that sound would wake them from their sleepwalk of power, and I kept working as if nothing had happened, because silence is always more terrifying than any declaration. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I sat in my Boston apartment, papers stacked high, a cup of cold coffee on the table. The subject line blinked. Invitation to discuss potential collaboration, NeuroVantage Labs. I read it again and again, no rush of emotion, only the faint curve of a smile. The sender. Dr. Marcus Levin. I remembered Marcus well, a seasoned scientist, once a board member at Metatronics 4 years ago. He was never warm, but he was one of the few who dared to look Victor in the eye and say, "You are driving this company off a cliff." The price of that honesty had been a humiliating meeting. Victor was standing in the middle of the room, calling Marcus outdated, then firing him publicly, like tossing out a salesman who couldn't meet quota. I had seen it with my own eyes, and now Marcus appeared in my inbox, representing Metatronics' biggest rival. The email was short, direct. "I heard about the recent decision. Victor has cut off his strongest arm. If you are willing, meet me. I want to talk about the future. Yours, this technology's, and the patients it can save." I sat still for a few minutes, reading each word slowly. No begging, no hollow promises, just a blunt invitation. Part of me wanted to delete it at once, knowing it was a lure to pull talent from a rival, but another part, found it almost funny. Victor had left the door wide open for a competitor, and Marcus was only stepping through it, coffee in hand. The meeting took place in Chicago, at a small cafe across from the university hospital. I chose a seat by the window, watching doctors in white coats rush by, patients with canes moving more slowly. The cafe wasn't fancy, just the smell of dark roast and soft jazz humming in the background. At the exact hour, Marcus walked in. Straight-backed, neat gray coat, salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp with humor. He sat down, offered no pleasantries, only a sly grin. Victor threw gold into the river. I only volunteered to pick it up. I let out a small laugh, half bitter, half amused. That line told the truth better than any market analysis ever could. Marcus didn't need to paint it. He knew I was sharp enough to hear the meaning. We ordered coffee. He stirred his cup with a silver spoon, voice steady. "I once sat where you sit now, in front of a board, listening to a man with nothing but slogans decide the fate of my life's work. I have not forgotten that feeling, and I don't think you have either." I didn't answer. I just watched the bubbles rise on the coffee's surface, feeling strangely calm. In my mind, I could already see the lines of text buried in the contract. Clause 7.3.2. Patent rights revert automatically to the chief architect. I didn't need saving. I had written my own escape 2 years earlier. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. NeuroVantage isn't looking for an employee. We want a partner. If you decide, all it takes is one word. Still, I said nothing. I gave only a faint smile, like hearing an old song replay. In my small notebook, I jotted notes. Not his words, but the date, the hour, the tone. I didn't want to miss a detail, because I knew. Everything could become evidence once the legal game began. The cafe was filled with noise. A nurse came in for a latte. A group of medical students joked about their practice surgery. I watched them, then Marcus. I didn't need to answer that day. An opportunity, once it shows up, doesn't vanish just because I stay silent. By late afternoon, I stepped out into the damp chill of Chicago. Wind off Lake Michigan whipped across my face, carrying damp air and the blare of horns. I walked a block, caught between two worlds. On one side, the hospital where lives dangled by a thread. On the other hand, the sleek labs where men in suits decided if a technology lived or died based on profit charts. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stopped and checked the screen. "Mom," I answered. Her voice shook but held steady. "Honey, I saw the news." "Did they really treat you like that?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, swallowing hard. "I just want to say one thing," she continued, slow and heavy, each word like a stone. "Don't let them drain you anymore. Your father, he wouldn't want to see you broken like this. You've given up too much already." I turned away, eyes burning. In the crowd, my chest tightened like someone had pressed a fist against it. The old note flashed in my mind. "You cannot save the whole world." Her words echoed that wound, cutting it open again. I wanted to answer, to promise her this time would be different. But my throat locked. I only nodded, though she couldn't see it. The call ended with a long tone. I stood still on the sidewalk, fingers gripping my bag strap. Part of me wanted to surrender, to listen to her, to go home, breathe, live like an ordinary person. But another part, the part that had worn the white headband all these years, whispered, "If you let go now, every sacrifice will mean nothing." The city lights flicked on, stretching my shadow long on the pavement. I drew in a deep breath and walked on. I didn't answer Marcus. I didn't answer my mother. But in my mind, the files were already ready, and Clause 7.3.2 was still alive. And I knew. The day they triggered it with their own hands was not far away. Chicago Memorial Hospital didn't usually host technology showcases, but that day the ground floor auditorium blazed with lights and filled with gray suits, red ties, and black evening gowns. Metatronic's banners hung along the entrance like spring festival flags, except the audience wasn't families strolling by. It was the FDA, top cardiologists, and dozens of heavyweight investors. Television cameras were already set up. If today went well, Victor Halden would land on the cover of Business Weekly under the headline, "The Man Who Redefined Emergency Care." I wasn't inside the auditorium. I chose a small cafe at the corner, less than 100 meters from the hospital entrance. The glass windows reflected the stream of people walking in. Polished shoes, thick briefcases, faces tight with profit-hungry hope. I ordered a cappuccino, sat by the window, laptop open but untouched. Now and then, I glanced at my phone where the team Slack still had me on the list. No one had dared cross my name out. Inside, Victor walked to the podium like the lead actor on a Broadway stage. He wore a fitted gray suit, a red tie pulled taut, his face gleaming under the lights. His voice rang out, rehearsed like a movie script. "Ladies and gentlemen, this device will redefine emergency care." The words landed with the confidence of a man convinced the universe revolved around him. The audience clapped politely, thin and scattered, waiting to see what this so-called redefinition looked like. I sipped my cappuccino, foam lingering on my lip, thinking, I've heard him say redefine so many times that if there were a drinking game for it, I'd be drunk before the demo even began. On the big screen, the Metatronics logo spun. The engineers backstage pressed the start button. At first, the system hummed smoothly, heart rate lines pulsing across the monitor. Victor spread his arms, grinning widely. Then, suddenly, the wave froze. The screen flickered once and displayed 2 words in cold gray. License authorization expired. The auditorium went silent, long enough to hear the leather chairs creak. Victor forced a smile, waved his hand. Just a minor hiccup. Give us 2 minutes. 2 minutes passed. Nothing changed. The heart rate line remained flat, the words still glowing. 5 minutes. Necks craned, whispers rose. 10 minutes. An investor snapped his notebook shut, stood up, and shook his head. 15 minutes. Cameras zoomed in on Victor's face, sweat streaking down, soaking his shirt. On Slack, messages flew. Logan, it worked in staging. Why isn't it working now? Priya, because she holds the key. Dylan, translation. We're screwed. I laughed quietly, drowning out the jazz in the cafe. I wrote it down in my notebook. Priya understood. Dylan still joked. Logan was in despair. My teammates had finally realized they were on a stage without the real key. Inside, an older doctor, I remembered him from Harvard, stood and spoke, voice rough but clear. If it can't start, how? Do you expect it to save lives? The room broke, not with joy, but with the bitter laughter of collapse. Applause mixed with whistles, cameras catching Victor's paling face. He stammered, We just need a few more minutes. But every passing minute was a blade against the FDA's patience. From my phone's live stream, it played out better than Broadway. I sipped my cappuccino and thought, they should have sold tickets. At least then, investors wouldn't leave empty-handed. After 20 minutes, no one sat still. A female doctor tossed her pen down and stormed out. A reporter whispered to a colleague, camera trained on engineers, slumping behind the curtain. Victor still stood, clinging to his posture like a drowning man grabbing rotten wood. But it was finished. The press pounced. That evening, the Chicago Tribune splashed a photo of Victor, red tie askew, sweat dripping. Medtronic stumbles in FDA demo. Questions raised about device viability. Twitter was crueler. Hash license expired trended within an hour. I stayed seated, flipping the paper, lips curved faintly, not out of glee, out of inevitability. Build your house on sand. Don't be surprised when the first wave wipes it clean. Slack kept buzzing. Priya, they finally get it. Without her, this project is nothing. Dylan, somebody tell Victor to update his license before bragging about redefining emergency care. Logan, should we reach out to Lila? I read, but didn't reply. They still didn't understand. I wasn't waiting to be dragged back as their emergency fix. I had left the clause. I had built the LLC. I didn't just hold the key, I held the building. Outside, the Chicago wind swept golden leaves across the pavement. I closed my laptop, set down the empty cup, and stood. The show was over, even if the lights were still on. I knew the panicked calls were already flying, the emergency meetings echoing in those sterile boardrooms, but I wasn't there. For me, the play had already ended. I stepped out into the street, thinking. Some bridges, once burned, are nothing but ash. And Victor had just learned that lesson live on camera. 2 days after the collapse at Chicago Memorial, I received a call with a voice dry but urgent. Dr. Monroe, the board would like to meet you. This afternoon. I laughed softly in my small kitchen. Strange. A week ago, I was thrown out like an unnamed assistant. Now they needed me like oxygen in an ICU. The Medtronics boardroom on the 35th floor blazed with light. Faces that once bent over their papers now twisted with worry. No polite nods. Only the vacant stares of people who knew the ship was sinking. I walked in slowly, pulled out a chair, and sat tall. Victor leaned against the wall, red tie wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He no longer looked like a triumphant CEO, but a cornered animal. The chairman spoke first, voice trembling, but trying to hold authority. Dr. Monroe, we have realized the project cannot survive without you. The investors demand stability. The FDA has questions. We are prepared to give you the authority you need. A stack of papers slid across the table toward me. I opened it. Bold letters stood out. Power equal to the CEO. Double salary. Veto over all technical decisions. I raised an eyebrow. A late gift, offered only when the water was already at their necks. Victor sprang forward, his voice cracking like shattered glass. Are you insane? She is not fit to lead. She is a woman too emotional, only good at playing the victim. The words fell into the room like a misfired shot. A few board members frowned. In this era, calling women emotional sounded like an old broken record. I stayed calm, flipping pages, not looking at him. The louder he shouted, the quieter I became. Victor, I said slowly, you can call me anything you want, but don't call me unfit. I saved this project from budget cuts. I protected every line of code, every chip, while you were busy rehearsing slogans. And clause 7.3.2, the one you ignored, is the reason we are all sitting here today. Victor gave a thin smile, but it trembled. He turned to the board, desperate to salvage credibility. Don't you see? She set a trap from the start. This isn't a guardian angel. This is a traitor. I have proof. She sabotaged the system for her own gain. Another strike, one I had predicted. On the big screen, he flashed spliced emails, tampered logs. Outside, headlines were already buzzing. Lila Monroe, the saboteur who wrecked Metatronics for profit. I glanced once, then closed the contract in front of me. Sabotaged? I repeated the word. Steady. Number. I safeguarded. I protected this technology from your hands that only wanted to turn it into a profit toy. If it failed to run, it was because you didn't respect the conditions of operation. Not because I destroyed it, because I kept my promise. The room fell silent. A few board members avoided my eyes, but none challenged me. They knew the truth. Victor still screamed. This is a lie. She wants to make Metatronics her hostage. I turned to him, voice even, cold as steel. No, Victor. Metatronics made itself a hostage long ago. I only wrote the key so someone could still save it. And you threw that key away. I rose, slid the stack of papers back across the table. The chair scraped with a dry groan. You think you can buy me with double pay, with veto power. You are wrong. There is one thing Metatronics cannot buy. Truth. And truth is not for sale to Metatronics anymore. The silence lasted one beat. Then the final thread snapped, and Victor exploded. He lunged at the table, fists slamming down, shouting, She will destroy everything. You will regret this. I didn't look back. I walked toward the door, my heels striking against the marble floor. His screams echoed behind me, mixed with chairs crashing and the board's frantic whispers. I didn't need to see it. I knew exactly what it looked like. A CEO slipping out of the saddle, and a board clinging to anything left, even my shadow. The door closed behind me. The hallway stretched ahead, carpet red underfoot, afternoon light streaming through glass, casting my shadow long on the wall. I thought to myself, I didn't need to rule them. I only needed to walk away carrying the truth. And truth, sooner or later, would burn down anyone who clung to lies. The email from NeuroVantage arrived on a strangely quiet afternoon. No loud alert, just a short notification on the screen of my old laptop in the small Cambridge apartment. Dr. Monroe, we officially propose. $1.5 billion US for full ownership of the technology. Contact Marcus Levin. I set my phone down and sat still. On the table, my mother's white headband lay worn and stained by the years. I picked it up, touched the cool fabric, and heard her voice echo from my father's funeral. Honey, some burdens were never meant for you to carry alone. Do not let this work turn your heart to stone. I had brushed it aside before. Now the words cut straight through my chest. Half of me wanted to reply yes instantly. The other half stayed quiet. Because this was not just a number. This was the border between turning an invention into merchandise and keeping it as the heartbeat of a patient on the table. My phone rang. Marcus. His voice was not bargaining, but steady, like a heartbeat in an emergency ward. Lila, Victor thinks he cleared the chessboard, but a queen does not vanish because someone swipes her away. The question is, do you want to set a new board? He paused, then added, with a trace of irony, they see this censor system as faulty merchandise. I see it as an artificial artery for thousands of emergencies. NeuroVantage is willing to pay so it can serve the purpose you built it for. I stayed silent. My father's image filled my mind again. Lying in that hospital bed, eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips when the doctor said he had 1 more hour for medication. If this device had existed then, he might have sat on the porch listening to the wind sweep the fields. I gripped the headband tight and answered slowly. I will not sell it to turn it into a money machine. I will sell it to save lives. If NeuroVantage intends otherwise, the recall clause will trigger automatically. I will never let anyone reduce lives to merchandise. Marcus chuckled softly, not mockery, but recognition. I expected nothing less. Sophia Carter may hold contracts with legal tricks, but Lila Monroe draws the line with ethics. We agree. On signing day, I entered the top floor of NeuroVantage headquarters. Oak floors stretched beneath warm golden light. A thick folder sat at my seat beside a Mont Blanc pen with a blue nib. The bold print on the first page made my heart catch. Purchase agreement, $1.5 billion US. The clock struck 10 sharp. Marcus walked in without grandeur. Simple black suit, silver-framed glasses catching the light. He sat across from me, gaze sharp enough to pierce through the armor I had carried for years. In biomedical science, he said, there are moments that divide toy makers from lifesavers. Today is one of them. I did not reply. I took the pen, drew in a long breath. My hand trembled slightly, but my eyes were clear. I thought of Dylan and his sarcastic jokes, Priya staying awake with coffee at 3 a.m, and Ethan, once my student, before he betrayed me. I thought of my mother urging me to let go. I thought of myself missing weddings, funerals, birthdays for the sake of blueprints and night shifts. I signed, and then the blue ink slid across the page like a heartbeat restored after a shock. Final. No turning back. Marcus extended his hand. A firm shake, not long, but enough to seal the truth. From now on, the rules had changed. Welcome back to the board, Lila. This time, you write the rules. Stepping out of the building, the Charles River wind slapped cold against my face, metallic in the autumn air. I stopped on the bridge, watched the golden light scatter across the water. I pulled out the white headband, studied it one last time, then slipped it into my pocket. Behind me, Boston buzzed on. Car horns, shoes on the pavement, coffee shops bursting with noise. No one knew that minutes earlier, inside that room, a contract worth $1.5 billion US had redrawn the future of an entire field. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, this wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. Then I opened my eyes and walked forward. I had not only left Metatronics, I had not only left Victor, I had left behind 15 years of sweat and sacrifice in the shadows. Some bridges, once burned, stay ash. But from that ash, a new road can rise, and this time I would walk it on my own feet. The news exploded the next morning. I was pouring coffee when the TV in my small apartment blared the anchor's voice. Breaking news. Metatronics loses $1.5 billion patent to rival NeuroVantage. Stock plunges 37% in a single day. The red ticker cut across the screen like a knife through the market's veins. Footage from the trading floors flashed by. Numbers bleeding red, traders clutching their heads, phones ringing nonstop. I took a sip of coffee, wincing at the burnt bitterness. Easier to swallow than whatever Victor Halden was drinking. Within hours, Boston's medical sector shook. Messages from Dylan lit up my phone. Dylan, the boss is sweating bullets. All hands meeting today. He looks pale as a ghost. Priya, the board is splitting. Some want Victor out immediately. Dylan, guess what? He just announced a live press conference, 2 o'clock sharp. I exhaled softly. A drowning man is still flailing. The more he flailed, the clearer his desperation. At 2 o'clock, the TV glowed bright. Victor stepped up to the podium. Silver gray suit, red tie strangling his neck. Flashbulbs popped as dozens of reporters crowded in. He cleared his throat, forced a smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Metatronics has lost nothing. We have simply been betrayed by one greedy individual. Dr. Lila Monroe sold out this company's technology for personal profit. We have proof. I burst out laughing, nearly spilling my coffee. Proof? Had he learned nothing from the FDA demo collapse? On screen, Victor waved a stack of papers, reading accusations line after line. Words like sabotage, betrayal, and selfishness poured out as if he were desperately labeling his own panic. But reporters weren't buying. A hand shot up. A woman's voice cut across the room. Mr. Halden, did you actually read the patent contract before signing it? The room rippled with laughter. Victor froze, jaw twitching, lips pressed tight. A simple question, but it landed like a punch to the jaw. He stammered, Of course. We have strict legal processes. But the cameras caught it all. Sweat streaking his forehead, fingers tugging the red tie loose, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Those photos hit Twitter within minutes. Under the hashtag Halden collapse, the public shredded him. CEO is worth negative $1.5 billion. Who's hiring him to teach how to lose everything 101? That red tie can't save a man choking on his own lies. I thought the press conference would collapse in ridicule, but then came the twist. The screen split. Files began flooding Medtronics' internal Slack. Priya messaged me instantly. Priya, you won't believe this. Ethan just dumped every email proving Victor forged evidence against you. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat slowing. Ethan, the protege who once betrayed me, who had stood beside Victor when the world turned against me. Now, the one flipping the table. The files showed it all. Altered logs, faked signatures, timelines sloppily edited. Each detail of a blade slicing into Victor. And the best part? Over 1,000 Medtronics employees were reading them in real time. At the press conference, a young reporter raised his microphone. Mr. Halden, your own staff just released documents proving you staged evidence against Dr. Monroe. How do you respond? Victor's face drained. He blinked rapidly, lips trembling. This is a misunderstanding, a fabrication. But belief had left the room. The camera zoomed close, sweat streamed down his temple. The red tie dangled half undone. His hands shook like he had Parkinson's. Another reporter pressed hard. If this is fabricated, Mr. Halden, then how do you explain your digital signature in the files? Or are you denying the very encryption technology your own company promoted? Laughter erupted. Questions pelted him like hailstones. Will you resign? Do you think you betrayed patients, not just your company? Do you realize how many contracts Medtronics has already lost because of you? Victor stammered, choked, unable to form a full sentence. I sat back, sipping red wine now, sinking into my chair. On screen, Victor was no longer a CEO. He was just a man stripped bare, suffocating in his own words. I laughed quietly, whispering, Some men drown not in water, but in their own words. Outside, the market roared. Medtronic stock is in free fall, and investors are scattering. Inside, Victor sank deeper, no push required. I didn't need to appear. I didn't need to shout. I only had to sit back, glass in hand, and let the truth do its work. And it was sweeter than any victory speech could ever be. Chicago's night smelled of metal and smoke. I walked along the old industrial district, warehouses abandoned under the sickly glow of sodium lamps. The street was so quiet I could hear my heels strike each crack in the concrete. No cheers, no audience. Just me and the night, and the city itself, silent witness. I stopped at a rusted steel table, covered in dust. In my hand was the white headband that had followed me for years, carrying my mother's words. This time, I placed it down, not to draw strength, but to release it. The fabric fluttered faintly in the night breeze. I looked at it and whispered calmly, Some bridges once burned, stay ash. That was enough. I would not carry it anymore. I left it there, in that cold void, as a full stop to every bridge that had burned behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The old group chat, Dylan, Priya, and a few who still remained, was not quiet yet. I typed slowly, clearly. Whatever I do next, you're with me. Seconds later, the screen lit up. Dylan sent a star emoji. Priya sent a heart. That was all, but my throat tightened. No grand promises. Just the knowledge that wherever I went, I would not go alone. I tilted my head back, watching the light glint across the thin mist above. A film reel played in my mind. The sterile smell of the ER, the relentless beep of monitors, the bitter taste of cold coffee on overnight shifts. Then the losses. My father's funeral was missed, my sister's wedding was absent, and the cold stares at gatherings I never attended. Back then, I thought it was a sacrifice. Now I knew it was the price. And from those cuts, I had been forged into a blade sharp enough to sever the chains Victor and Metatronics once wrapped around me. I spoke softly, to the past and to anyone listening. This wasn't a setback, it was an opportunity. Opportunities often wear the mask of humiliation. A file slammed on a table, a cold notice of termination, a row of colleagues turning away. People think that is the end. Sometimes it is only a quiet invitation to begin a different game. Victor thought he ended me in that boardroom. In truth, he handed me the key to rewrite the rules. And his downfall came not from my shouting, but from his own words, binding him in front of every camera. Some men drown not in water, but in their own words. I had learned one thing. Justice is not the sound of drums. It is water wearing down stone, patient and steady until the stone finally breaks. Justice isn't loud. Justice is silent, but it's unforgettable. I sat on the cold chair, watching the city outside. Headlines, hashtags, breaking news, all circling around Metatronics' collapse and Victor Halden's disgrace. Analysts argued, crowds mocked, investors condemned. I didn't need to join the chorus. I didn't need to prove anything more. I just sat, breathing deep, feeling my heart, for the first time, at ease. And I want to tell you, the one listening to this story, maybe you too have been dismissed in a boardroom. Maybe you've received a cold email of termination, or watched teammates turn their backs. Maybe you sat there thinking your value had been buried. Remember, your true worth is not in a paycheck or a title. It's in the patience you hold, in the work you built quietly, in the truth no one can strip from you. Humiliation is not always an ending. Sometimes it is a beginning. I remembered my mother's words, "Honey, do not let this work turn your heart to stone." Now I understand. She meant to choose carefully what was worth carrying. I no longer had to wear the white headband like a weight. I could leave it behind because the mission was clear. The technology would save lives. It would not be sold as a toy, and my heart, scarred though it was, had not turned to stone. If you've listened this far, I have one question. Have you ever turned humiliation into a new set of rules? Tell me in the comments. I want to see the map of hearts from Boston, Chicago, or wherever you live. And if you believe truth cannot be fired, if you believe justice is silent but sharp, hit subscribe. I share stories like this every week. Justice isn't loud, justice is silent, but it's unforgettable.